Welcome and good evening. I'm Dr. Carrie Neville, coordinator of Georgia College's Creative Writing Program and faculty in the Department of English. Thank you all for coming to the final DeRuger Distinguished Visiting Scholar event of 2022. A reading by Georgia College's Dr. and Mrs. Barry DeRuger Distinguished Visiting Scholar, Rabi Alameddine, who is the Kapnick Foundation Distinguished Writer-in-Residence at the University of Virginia. It gives me great pleasure to announce that Rabi's latest novel, The Wrong End of the Telescope, was just yesterday named a finalist for the prestigious PEN/Faulkner Award. What a lucky coincidence timed with his visit to Georgia College. And welcome to those of you watching us online. For those in the audience, please make sure your cell phones are silenced. Thank you, Dr. and Mrs. Barry DeRuger, for your generous gift, which made Mr. Alameddine's residency possible. Thank you to Dean Eric Tenbus, the College of Arts and Sciences, Dr. Matthew Pangborn, the Creative Writing Program and Department of English for additional support of DeRuger Scholar events. It is now my pleasure to introduce Professor Peter Selgin, faculty in the Creative Writing Program and the Department of English, who will be introducing Rabi Alameddine. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm not going to list all of the accomplishments of our distinguished guest this evening. Carrie has mentioned a couple of them. He's also a National Book Award finalist, and there are many accomplishments. You can look them up. I'm also not going to give a biography, really, except to mention that, among other things, Mr. Alameddine was born in Lebanon, at least according to what I read, and lived in San Francisco, among other gay men, at the height of the AIDS epidemic, and coincidentally during the Civil War in Lebanon. Also, given my love of visual art, much as I'm tempted to, I'm not going to delve into that facet of his multifaceted accomplishments. Instead, I'd like to focus my introduction on three little words that, for me, inasmuch as an artist's oeuvre can be tidily summed up, sum up Mr. Alameddine's. It was while performing my due diligence in composing this introduction that I came upon those three words in one of several interviews given by him, responding to a question, the gist of which was, Mr. Alameddine, is it your goal to mess with the heads of your readers? And there they were, those three delectable words. Fuck the reader. I knew then that my task in composing this introduction would be anything but onerous, for then and there I fell in love with its subject. Now, to my students sitting out there, my embrace of those three words may seem like a contradiction, if not utter hypocrisy. For how many times have I said to you, as writers, we owe our readers every consideration, while they, our readers, in turn, owe us nothing. And though I do believe that it's true, still, it's also no less true that the conventions and rules by which we authors humbly seduce our readers are not only meant to be broken, but have to be broken, if only to resist the persistent onslaught of the writer's greatest enemy, the cliché. But to break the rules well, you have to first master them, and that Mr. Alameddine has surely done, as evidenced by the giddy, hand-wringing recklessness, almost like a James Bond villain drooling over his imminent conquest of civilization, with which he has approached every one of his books. Oh, so you want a plot, do you? Take that. Anyway, Mr. Alameddine's assaults on convention take on more than just plot. beginning with the bricolage barrage that is Kool-Aid's, his first novel, through I. Devine's blocked memoirist who continually fails to write her way past chapter 1, through the fractured, memory-haunted narratives of angels of history and an unnecessary woman, each in their own way, Mr. Alameddin's novels blow up the genre to give us something fresher, something more daring, something more alive than conventions can possibly bear. Like any artist worth their salt, Mr. Alameddin is no lover of convention, no lover of labels, categories, definitions, any of the things, the constructs by which we are limited, confined, pigeonholed. Indeed, one is as hard-pressed to pin labels on Mr. Alameddin himself as on his books. In his own words, he is or has been an Arab, an American, a Lebanese American. In Lebanon, he says, I'm considered an American, and in America, I'm considered Lebanese. A gay man, atheist, engineer, visual artist, soccer player, outsider, oddball, world-class grump, and proud of it. By way of his writing, too, he's been other people, other things. A blue-haired 72-year-old protagonist in his National Book Award finalist, An Unnecessary Woman. And a red-haired, writer's block-afflicted memoirist in I. Divine. In his latest novel, The Wrong End of the Telescope, he inhabits a transgendered Lebanese-American surgeon. Asked how he is able, how he dares to write such other voices, he will tell you that that's the whole point of fiction writing, to engage with and ultimately to become the other, to erase those boundaries that define and limit and divide us, to expand our perspectives and enlarge our worlds. And in case you're wondering, no, he doesn't seem to have very much patience with injunctions against cultural appropriation, as long as it's done well. The great architect Frank Lloyd Wright famously said, I don't build a house without predicting the end of the present social order. To advance their art, great writers must also subvert it. To be truly good, they must be bad. Mr. Alameddin is, then, in that good sense, a bad writer. Ultimately, though, it's not the reader whom Mr. Alameddin seeks to assail. It is the reader's pre-existing emotions, those ready-made sentiments in plastic bags, to paraphrase Nabokov, those agreed-upon feelings with which we are all so comfortable, since they're not really our own. So, to the distinguished lineage of giddily grumpy bad boy and bad girl writers, going back to Byron and beyond, from Celine to Henry Miller, Dorothy Parker, Sylvia Plath, Norman Mailer, Kathy Acker, Uya Beck, we add the name Rabi Alameddin, Georgia College's 2022 Doctor in Berry, Mrs. Barry DeRuger Distinguished Visiting Scholar, and welcome him here with us tonight.
Thank you. Like I said yesterday, it's always awkward to be introduced. And like I said yesterday, I feel like they're talking about somebody else. I am distinguished. I just don't know what I'm distinguished for. Anyway, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And to all those who are watching online, please know that we are making fun of you here. Really, after this is over, we're just going to get together and make fun of you people. So, I'm going to read a segment from my last book. For those of you that do not know, or for those of you that know, it's about a transgendered Lebanese surgeon. But the segment that I will be reading is not from that. And I could go on with the introduction, but really, who cares? Let me just start reading. The title of the section is Dream House Maintenance. Your father built the house of his dreams in his home village in the mountains of Lebanon, not far from the house he grew up in, the one his father had built. Before he broke ground, your father, though not very religious, did what every Druze man should when building or buying something new. He visited one of the Druze elders, a man in his late 80s who lived in a tiny village that was difficult to reach, hidden in a verdant valley encircled by high mountains. Your father asked the elder to bless his new home, which the man did by writing a little prayer on a piece of paper, which he folded and put in a small envelope that was essentially another folded piece of cardstock paper, a Lebanese origami. Your father placed the blessing, no bigger than a child's finger, between the first two stones laid down for the house. The House of Dreams was finished in 1974. And what a house it was. Overlooking the city of Beirut, it was sleek and modern, distinct and sui generis, melding into the hills around it, but unlike any other building in the area. In the middle of the house was the pièce de résistance, a glassed-in room with an open-air top in which grew an old olive tree. But then, your father covered the top with chicken wire and began to fill the room with birds, all kinds of birds. Canaries at first for the song, goldfinches to sing back. Then local larks, finches, warblers, and bee-eaters. When he included the first weavers, your father had to fill the room with dried grass and dead plants so those yellow things with feathers could build their intricate nests. He brought in nightingales, but they didn't sing. From the Netherlands, he purchased imported birds of paradise with ridiculously long tails. The aviary became his passion. Everybody loved it, even you, cynical you. But were you cynical then? You have often written that in 1974, when you were 14, a year before the civil war started in Lebanon, was the single happiest year of your life. You found out that you could pass for normal for short bursts of time, after which you had a good hiding place, your bedroom with a never-ending bookshelf in the new house. You would be able to make it. Not a happy existence, but still survival. Existence in and of itself was an accomplishment. But violence descended, only it wasn't directed at you personally as you had expected. The Lebanese civil war erupted, and you were bundled up and sent out of the country for safekeeping, the young immigrant. The house remained, though. Throughout the early stages of the war, nothing touched it. Pressed and flattered between the two first stones, the tiny paper prayer worked its magic. Every time you visited during those first few years of the first few years of the war, and you did that quite a bit, you noticed that the house stood proud, not a scratch. Every house in the village had a pointillist array of bullet holes, but not your father's. A missile would fall in the orchard. A grenade would explode on the main road, but the birds in your father's house kept singing. A miracle if there ever was one. Christian militias, Druze or Muslim ones, they couldn't harm your father's house. The Syrian army, Palestinian fighters, the house existed beyond the ravenous cruelty of the war and its mundanity. Bullets, rocket-propelled grenades, missiles, they all bypassed it, swerved and detoured. The wonder lasted for 7 glorious years. But then the Israelis invaded. Would the Israelis understand paper prayers? Could the talisman protect against the evil eye of an invading army? Was Druze juju translatable into Hebrew? A most definite yes, it seemed. Phylacteries were as common among Jews as they were among the Druze. There were a couple of close calls. When the tanks arrived on the hill above your father's house, a general's megaphone voice warned the village not to harbor any terrorists. The latter defined as anyone who was not welcoming the neighborly Israeli invasion with enough cheer. 15,000 Lebanese were killed when the first 2 weeks of the 15,000 Lebanese were killed within the first 2 weeks of the Israeli invasion, which obviously meant they were all uncheerful terrorists. If the villagers did not want to be shocked and awed by having their homes bombed into oblivion, they should raise a white flag on the roof to indicate that there was no unfriendly terrorists in the house. Your mother stripped all of the linens of the beds and hung the white sheets on the roof's laundry lines. She worried that would not be enough. For 2 days, while the tanks boomed above her house, your mother ran back and forth along the laundry lines, shaking the sheets to make sure they were seen from above. Possessed by Lisa, the spirit of madness and frenzy, your mother set herself up between the folds of each sheet and swayed her arms back and forth, then moved to the next sheet and the next for 48 hours in a row. The prayer blessing worked on the Israelis with little help from your mother acting like a Halloween ghost on meth. Not a scrape, not a blemish on the house. A week after your mother shook the sheets, a young Israeli soldier knocked on the large mahogany door. Your parents saw a shy, scrawny, mild-mannered boy. He looked 14 at best, your mother told you, his glasses too big for his face. She wanted to drag him to your room, order him to get out of the idiotic uniform, grab a bath, pick something normal to wear from your closet, and then she would feed him. The soldier, speaking fluid Levantine Arabic, apologized profusely for disturbing them. So much so that your parents began to feel guilty for appearing intimidating to the poor boy. He had heard the birds, he told them, all the way from down the street. He followed the sounds to the house, just as Melquiades, the gypsy in 100 Years of Solitude, found his way to Macondo by following the song of the birds. Beautiful singing. Some trills the boy knew, but some he could not identify. He was going to study ornithology, you see. He was obsessed with birds, like his own father was. He hadn't been sure where the birdsong was coming from until that day, when he finally had a break. He was not supposed to wander on his own, he said, but the siren song called to him. He begged for permission to see the birds, if only for a moment. Of course, your parents let him in. Your father may have despised the Israeli, but a young man who loved birds couldn't be a terrible person. The young man was stunned when he saw the glassed-in room, sunlight inside the house, the outdoors, indoors, and birds, a profusion of birds. He had a look of such longing that your father forgave his trespasses, almost his country's as well, but not quite. The coffee came out, the entire hospitality accoutrements, almonds, candies, chocolate. Even in the middle of a war, one must be prepared for guests. When your mother complimented the soldier on his Arabic, he explained that his mother was Druze and his father Jewish. He spoke Arabic with his mother's family and Hebrew with his father's. He had problems, he said, answering your mother's questions. He was Jewish, but not technically, since his mother was, and he wasn't Druze because his father wasn't. He felt homeless, he said, which of course elicited housely homilies from your parents. Had I read that aloud when I would have taken that out. Of course, elicited hostily homilies from your parents. Their home was his home. He would always be welcome. The usual stuff. He asked if he could visit again when the Israeli army withdrew. On the way back was how he phrased it. Surely this invasion would not last long. Of course, your parents assured him. If they were still around, if he remembered, then his visit would be most welcome. You didn't know whether he remembered, but luckily your family was no longer around. The Israelis went insane, bombing Beirut incessantly. Even though the house wasn't in danger, your family decided to pack as much as they could and left for the safety of Damascus. Your parents left as soon as the Americans got involved. The Israelis forced the Lebanese parliament to elect the head of the Phalange as president, and he was assassinated soon after. The Israeli army surrounded the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps, and the Phalangists massacred thousands of women and children as Ariel Sharon smoked his hookah and cheered from the sidelines. Oh, the hand-wringing at the UN. Israel decided it would occupy only the south of Lebanon. The civil war flared again. The American Marines got involved in the war. Unfortunately for your family, Americans don't understand paper prayers. Druze juju would not translate into English. Blessings were not America's forte. One morning, for reasons no one could fathom, the battleship New Jersey, cruising in the Mediterranean a tad off the Lebanese shore, fired its 16-inch shells into various villages in the mountains, killing who knows how many. One of those shells fell through the roof of your father's dream house, incinerating everything. The structure remained standing for the most part, roofless but standing. Nothing inside was unharmed. The birds were roasted alive. After its murderous foray into Lebanese politics, the New Jersey was retired, the last of its kind. The shell that destroyed your home might have been the last 16-incher to be fired. Don't you feel special? The Americans? A man drove a truck full of explosives into the U.S. barracks just outside of Beirut, killing 241 young Marines. Reagan withdrew all his forces, washing his hands of irrational Lebanon, calling the Lebanese terrorists, terrorists, terrorists that kill innocent peacekeepers. Why couldn't they fight fairly, like decent people, using battleships, fighter jets, shock and awe? Your mother would phone you in your small apartment in San Francisco. Your father was depressed, she told you. He didn't know what to do anymore. The house was more than his pride and joy, she explained. The house was him, and he was the house. The battleship destroyed him. He had no idea who he was anymore. He tried to be stoic. He was a man's man, after all. He'd tell her that they would build another house, maybe buy an apartment in Beirut, or start anew and move to Paris. But she had caught him surreptitiously weeping on more than one occasion, whenever he thought no one was watching. She wished you were there to comfort him. But what could you do? What could you do? You were in graduate school. You had to go to get another degree in order to become a productive member of an evil society. You gobbled up hamburgers and quenched your thirst with Coke. You dove into gay sex clubs every night. You were assimilating, for crying out loud. You did not wish to remain an outsider in your adopted country. How could you explain to your father that you were not coming back, that you were choosing to become a citizen of the country that destroyed his dream house with a single 16-inch shell? Which side were you on? You would try to become an American, become one with people who would rather see your family dead. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists. How's, how's that for a cheerful sort? One second. Let me read another short piece. I promise it's short. And it's from a long time ago. And it's a little fable set in the same place. Once, not too long ago, there was a little boy about the same age as you who lived with his family in a small village not unlike this one, not too far from here. The family did not have much money. The father was a stonemason. The mother looked after the house, cooked delicious meals. All the children had their own chores to do. Our boy was the family's shepherd. Every morning, he would take the sheep out to pasture. He watched them graze, made sure they did not wander, and protected them from foxes, wolves, and marauding hyenas. The sheep liked him and trusted him. So they didn't stray far from our boy. His job became easy, and every day he had time to play. At first, he played with sticks and stones. He made a sheep pen by staking twigs in four corners. Small stones were his sheep. But then the little lambs came into his make-believe pen, clamoring for his attention. So he stopped playing with sticks and stones and became one of the lambs, jumped with them, bent down and pretended to chew on the wild lavender bushes, bleated with them. When he returned home that evening, he wished he were a lamb because he had fun playing. Before he went to sleep, he heard his parents arguing about money. "We have so many mouths to feed," the mother said. "How can we find enough for all of them?" "We have the sheep," the father said. "We have some money. I am working. We'll survive. We have for generations." But they kept on arguing, and the boy slept fitfully. The following day, he and the lambs played again, watched over by the ewes. The boy and the lambs ran and jumped and jostled each other. He returned home very happy. But when he opened the door to tell his parents all about his day, he found them arguing. "How could you have promised that?" the mother asked. "We don't even have enough to feed our children, and now you want to have a feast? Have you no conscience? Don't you understand how bad our situation is?" "How dare you?" the father yelled at the mother. "This is the Bey we're talking about. It's an honor. When he comes here, the house will be blessed. I don't understand how you can think of not wanting him in your home. Most people would die for the opportunity." The mother whispered, "What has the Bey done for my family?" The father slapped the mother. The boy ran into his room. Before he fell asleep, our boy prayed. He wished he were a lamb and could play all day without any worries. He wished his family could be happy. He wished that he could be the one to provide them with happiness. He loved his family so much. He woke up the next day in the sheep pen. He looked around and saw all his friends, the other lambs, happy that he was in their midst. Finally, one of them. They bleated in joy. All of them pranced up and down. The father and mother came out of the house together and walked toward the pen. "Danger, danger," said the eldest ewe. "The evil ones are here." "No, no," said our boy. "They are not evil. They are my family." When those two show up together, another sheep said, "One of us disappears." The father and mother came into the pen. They tried to figure which lamb to pick. "Look at me," the boy yelled. "Look at me, look at me." "This one," the mother said. "He is noisy." "He looks plump and juicy," the father added. He placed the noose around his boy's head and walked him out of the pen. "The poor lamb," the eldest ewe said as the sheep watched him being taken away. "Daddy, Daddy," the little lamb said, "I'm a lamb now. Isn't this a miracle?" And his father took out the knife and slit his throat. And the little lamb watched his own blood leave him. and his father cut off his head, and his father hung him from his ankles to drain him. And his mother began to skin him with her own hands. She would lift a small part of his skin and punch between the skin and body, lift, punch, until she finally cut the last attached skin at his ankles. And she chopped off his feet and hands. And she took out all of his insides. And his mother cooked him over a slow-burning fire. His father waited. His mother cooked. His brothers helped set up the large table under the giant oak. His sisters cleaned the house and cleaned and cleaned. They got dressed in all the fineries. By lunchtime, they were lined up waiting. The mother wondered where our boy was. His brothers suggested he must be daydreaming somewhere as usual. He had gotten out of doing the chores, the sneaky brat. The family waited and waited and waited. Finally, the mayor arrived and said that the bey had decided not to come to the village. The lamb was placed in the middle of the table. The whole family salivated. You outdid yourself, the father told the mother. This lamb was particularly succulent, the mother said, and the boy felt his father tear into him. Pass your plates, children, the mother said. We'll get to have a great meal for a change. And the boy felt his brothers bite into his flesh. He felt his sisters chew sumptuous pieces of him. This tastes so good, his brothers said. The best meal we've ever had, his sisters said. And the mother brought out his stomach. His siblings fought over his intestines. You take this, my dear, his father told his mother. I know you love it. And you take this, my dear, his mother told his father, for I know you love it. And I am happy, said the father. And I am happy, said the mother. And the boy felt his mother bite into his testicles. And the boy felt his father swallow a piece of his heart. And the boy was happy. Thank you so much. And on this happy note,
Did you take questions?
sure,
Does anybody have any questions for Rabi?
especially from those people who are online. Do you want to do it song and dance now? I have
There's a
for-
question back there. Yeah.
How do I have an idea that I know I want to pursue and turn into a full-length novel? Usually, the question answers itself. Usually, a novel is the idea that I pursue that turns into a novel. I'm an obsessive kind of person, so an idea has to obsess, and I will, once I know that I can't stop thinking about it, then that's the novel. But I really don't know that because, sorry, today I've been asked the same question, so I tend to repeat myself. Right now I'm not writing, for example, although I am writing. But nothing has grabbed me so far. So 3 months ago, I had this idea that I thought would last, and it didn't. A year ago, I was going to write a book about my father, and I thought, for sure, this is it, and it didn't. So they tend to disappear, those ideas that don't grip me. And at some point, I hope, if this is not the last book that I write, some idea will grip me, and it will last more than 3 months. And when that happens, that usually ends up being the book. And then sometimes, some of the stuff that I'm writing now, they're not gripping, but they are what will lead me to what I want to write about. So usually I say, my books are the ideas that gripped me for 3-4 years. If it's less than that, I usually abandon them. I get bored. Any other questions? Does that answer your question? I can ask myself questions like, there are a lot of the settings are, where I grew up. Um, I have this theory that is, unproven or anything, that most of us are stuck in high school between the ages of 12 and 17. Those are the hormone years, as I call them, which is why, high school romances, all the movies are like these big things. When we're in high school, we think, you're not that far away from it, so I'm also making fun of you a little. You think that, this, love is the love of your life, and, somebody hurt something else, and oh my God, how could you do this? All these emotions are raging, and the setting and, the family dynamics and all that are part of this, and you get stuck. So for me, I read two pieces that were, in the same mountain village that I grew up with. I grew up in a village of 700 people. Milledgeville is New York compared to and this is where I feel most stuck. So my stories tend to be there. I've written stories in, Lesbos and Greece. I've written stories, in Beirut, in New York, in San Francisco, and it's not. But the stories that I just noticed that the stories that I wanted to read, where the oomph happens, is primarily where I grew up. What happened to me, and of course, mine was compounded in that, they were my raging hormone years, and I was, thought that the world was my, everything that happened in my high school was the world, like, oh my God, and there was a civil war. So it made a lasting impression. But yeah, I usually would say, if you want to know what you'll spend your life writing about, look at your high school years. Whatever obsessed you then is what obsesses you forever. I know, especially if you were the one that nobody sat with at lunch. I'm not saying I was. Yes, please. I don't care. I made a decision a long, long time ago. And I remember one of the first interviews I did back in 1998, where somebody asked, well, what do you say to all those who think, the Middle East is trouble? And my response is, if I wanted to write a book about a lesbian, I wouldn't ask what a homophobe thinks of the book. So if I'm writing a book about the Middle East, I don't care what people who don't know about the Middle East think of it. I write. How it is interpreted is not up to me. Now, of course, it upsets me, and I've talked about this forever, where everything that happens is because they're Lebanese, as opposed to, it's because they're humans and we do the same thing. But it's what we have to go through. It's where I chose to live. But I actually, again, sorry, I keep saying that. In one interview, I said that, most Lebanese think I write for Americans. And most Americans think I write for Lebanese. And the truth is, I don't give a fuck about either one of them. I write for me. I am lucky, beyond lucky, that people seem to like something about it. But the idea of worrying what a market thinks, or whether there is an American market, and I'm not being, standoffish. I am standoffish, but I'm not being standoffish right now. I just don't care. It's too much of, it's not the last thing I think about when I'm writing. It is absolutely the last thing. When I'm writing, I'm trying to make a story work. I am trying to make a sentence work. Is this word the right word? To worry about whether Americans understand me or not is the least of my concerns. Sorry. Okay. Mm-hmm. No, sorry. Writing for me is almost the exact opposite of therapy. Um, I go to a psychiatrist who prescribes drugs because of the problems exacerbated by my writing. My writing fucks me up. You know, uh, it is, and I have been corrected, and they might be right that it might be that this is cathartic. It brings up all the issues when I'm writing about it, and then I go to my psychiatrist and complain about what my father did when I was 8. God damn it. But is that therapeutic? I don't think so. If you want something therapeutic, go see a therapist. And I'm not being facetious. If you want, writing is a completely different thing. Writing, whether you're writing about your own experiences or you're writing about a colony in Mars that gets attacked by giant beetles, if you are writing well, it is accessing things you really don't want to be accessing most of the time. It is not therapeutic, it is the opposite of that. But then it is therapeutic because if you don't do that, you get fucked up in other things. So I hate the idea of thinking of, I write to process things. No. I sometimes write to try and understand what happened. But sometimes that's more difficult than sometimes it's probably better that I ignore many things. And I do write a lot about my experiences, but I must say here, I never turned into a lamp. Never, ever, ever turned into a lamp, and I don't bleed too well either. Please.
Comparing when you started out as a writer earlier in your career, where do you see the most change yourself as a writer?
Being here. It never occurred to me in my wildest dreams when I started out that, I would get people giving me awards, that I would get people coming to hear me talk. It never occurred to me. It was a private thing that I wanted to do to fuck my boyfriend who dumped me. I wanted all the kids in kindergarten to regret the fact that they never invited me to their party. It never occurred to me, that I complain about my life all the time and that I'm a, loser, I'm a this, and then sometimes I think I have been blessed. So what has changed is I've had to change my whole sort of view of myself and think of how lucky I am. It's not easy. Actually, I didn't think I would answer it that way. I'm sorry. What has changed a lot also is, of course, I know myself better. I'm older. I think my writing I mean, I can pinpoint certain books. The one that I read from second, the Hakawati, took me 8 years to write. The difference between that and the book that came beforehand is incredible. I mean, when I look back and I think, what the fuck happened? You know, the first 3 books, I'm fine. I stand by them. You know, they're well received, etc., etc. But the fourth was a level that I never thought I would ever reach. I think the last book is I mean, again, I surprise myself. And I'm surprised that people like it. I'm surprised that, you know, writers that I respect like it. I am stunned most of the time. So I'm trying to balance now because, like I said, a couple of things in the last 2 days have happened outside of here that shook me to the core. You know, that certain writers came through that, you know, it's like they're talking to me, and I keep thinking, do they know that I'm the loser to end all losers? You know, it's been shocking. Again, we should actually talk about something else now. Do you have another question, Will, please? How about the Knicks? Do we like the Knicks? Oh, come on. America's team? Nah. Giants, San Francisco Giants. I don't know because, you know, you're sitting right there. Mm-hmm. Uh, that that book is, I mean, I always give an example. My first draft of it was 1,300 pages. You know, it went down finally to like 560 pages or something like that. But it had many voices. The easiest, of course, like I said, for me was the young boy, because I keep saying I'm stuck in that age. I'm stuck in you know, I'm 15 at most. It's not difficult for me to think how that boy would think, and so that voice came easily. The beginning of the chapter was from the grandfather's point of view, and that was a lot more difficult. Even though he's a storyteller and he's a card and he makes jokes and he makes fun of his grandson and all that, it wasn't difficult, but it was in some ways. The 12-year-old, 13-year-old, I kind of have down pat. That's me. You know, when like, everything's happening, yay, that's me. So I'm going to say that's my true, authentic self. Anything else? See, I've always wanted to ask myself, like, are you always this fabulous, or is just behind a podium?
What's your answer?
Always. Please. In the first book is a bricolage, basically. It's a kaleidoscope, I can't think of what the technique of using all kinds of papers and putting them, collage. And that was, in many ways, the most organic thing that I did. And I did it mostly because the world that I was living in was crazy. I mean, my friends were dying all around me. AIDS was taking everybody. My family in Lebanon was crazy, and nothing made sense. To write anything that was straightforward would be crazier, in my opinion. So that's how it started. But then, obviously, that's how my mind works. It moves quickly. Like sometimes it's in a circle that keeps going around and around and around. So yes, it just feels more natural to me. But the first time I did was because it just seemed, in many ways, the craziness seemed more sane to me than the world. Oh, of course. Oh, of course, of course. I was obsessed at the time with, I could name them: Borges, Calvino, Cortázar, writers who, even Kundera, they would just go on tangents. And Calvino was my god for the longest time. I worshipped him. And he taught me, all about linearity and nonlinearity. As we've talked, I have never taken a writing class, so for me, everything I learned from the books that I read. And what we call now sort of the postmodernists, John Barth, Raymond Coover, Robert Coover. I read them religiously, and it seemed as the perfect way of looking at my world at the time. But even again, when I think about it, even 100 Years of Solitude, it's like it makes sense to me. It wasn't as much bricolage, but there was never a sense of time, even though it's 100 years and he goes through it exactly linearly. It never felt linear to me. Anything else? I'm done after this. I go home after this. Your last chance. Oh God, my only companions in life are my cats. They run my life, and I think about them all the time. Yeah. I've had cats and dogs all my life, but since I was by myself, I've only had cats because it's difficult to have a dog in the city, I think. But yeah, they and my bubble bats are probably my most intimate relationships. Um, Different writers do it completely differently. What works for me will most probably not work for you, because I had a lot of, when I went to college, I went as an engineer. One of my main strengths is the ability to see things visually in three-dimensional, so that I'm less able to do it now the older I get. But when I was younger and when I was writing like Hakawati and with a novel over like 7 generations with all these characters, I had it all in my head. And if a writer friend of mine reminds me that in a restaurant we were in New York, and I took the napkin or the thing on this paper, and I took a pen and I drew basically the structure of the novel that was in my head. I'm able to do that. She's unable to do that. So when she needs to do something like that, she plots everything. It just depends on your personality. I tend to make things up and then see if they fit. And if they don't fit, I throw them out. Whereas, other writers will see if they fit. If they don't fit, they try to change it. I just throw them out. Different personalities, different things. If you're writing something fragmented and different timelines, with what I would say, the narrator changes ages differently, it might be better for you to actually write it down. I have a friend who has a calendar, and now with computer calendars, it's probably a lot easier. But she has, on February 17th, 1982, my character was born. On, June 16th, she was 20. So that when she's writing from a certain date, she knows what happened to her writer. I do it instinctively. It's up to the writer. Unfortunately, I don't plot very much. So, and I don't know where the fuck I'm going most of the time. So I just sit down and I write and I write and I write and then oh, so that's what I'm writing about. Whereas a close friend of mine, well, not close because I haven't talked to her in forever, the writer Sue Miller, she once told me, and her books are lovely, that she plots every single minute, every page, what is going to be happening on this, what is going to be happening in this. I would have no idea. But so she spends a year thinking about the novel, and when she sits down to write it, she can basically write it because, all that's left is language, but the plot is completely, I wish I could do that. I wish I could have a phone that has that song. Anything else? It was easy for that book because it wasn't that easy, but some parts of it were easy because that book is called the Hakawati, which is the Arabic form of storytelling. So I relied a lot on how a Hakawati does it, which is they will tell a story this was long before soap operas, that could last a year. And so they will tell the story orally. And because it lasts for so long, they repeat many things. And there is a beauty, a musical beauty, to actually hearing something being repeated over and over and over. And poetry can do that every now and then. I did it in prose, where you would start a story and then it would get repeated. The same battle comes back 200 pages later with all this. I thought it worked. I thought it was brilliant. I thought I was brilliant. Nobody else did. So I had to start taking them out. That was one part of it. There were, again, since it was a book about storytelling, everybody would tell a story, and then there's the story, in the story, the protagonist start telling stories, and then in that story, someone would start telling a story, and they all revolve. And like I said, I had it all in my head. So removing some of the stories was painful, but it wasn't difficult. It did not affect the novel as much. And you had one of the first things you learn as a writer is it's not about what you love, it's about the book. And that's a painful lesson, that you might love something deeply, but you have to get rid of it because the book requires that you do. And that's not always easy. But it has to be done. Although, again, I won't say what, I have kept 3 pages that I thought were unnecessary because one of the sentences I could not remove. And I would keep 3 pages for a good sentence. Actually, I hate to say this, but I'm trying to think now and I can't even remember. But at that time, it was really, really, really important. Okay. Thank you so, so much. You've been a great audience, and thank you, except for the people online, I really appreciate it. You've been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming, and again, thank you to Dr. and Mrs. Barry DeRuger for making this evening possible. Have a good night.